JFK's passing. And then the Tangshan earthquake happens in the late summer. And right after that, Mao Zedong passes away. And over 200,000 people are actually killed in this Tangshan airport, Tangshan earthquake. And what was interesting about the earthquake is I'm sitting there at dinner one time doing business, and we're at a table and I'm doing business with PetroChina, and one of my friends, Wang Hongli, who is a compatriot of mine and working with me, we're on like the third story in a Beijing restaurant. It's an Italian restaurant, and we just ordered some wine, we're sipping wine, and this big truck goes by, and the building actually starts to shake. And all of a sudden, Wang Hongli starts to sweat, he turns red, and he starts to jitter, and we say, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong? He says, and then he explains, his grandmother covered him in that Tangshan earthquake. And I got to learn, and later I went to Tangshan, and I talked to various people about this earthquake. Anyway, the point is, the mandate of heaven is a concept that when God doesn't want, when heaven doesn't want the rulers to continue, something like an earthquake is going to happen. So then there's this concept, let's go back 600 years. Starts in 1403, the third emperor, the Yongle emperor of the Ming Dynasty, Zhu Di, who sent off Zheng He on his 30-plus voyages all around, it seems, the world, if you believe the book 1421. But he builds this thing called the Temple of Heaven. And why is he building this thing called the Temple of Heaven? So you have the Forbidden City in Beijing, and you go south of it. You can walk from the Forbidden City to the Temple of Heaven. It's not that far of a walk. And when you go to it, it's just a lot of tourists there and stuff. But actually, in the Temple of Heaven, there is this incredible, interesting thought form. And what Zhu Di was doing when he did this, and also he got it from his father, who was the first emperor, who started the Ming Dynasty, and that was the rites, and that is to sacrifice an unblemished lamb once a year, on December 21st, at a minimum, to keep the dynasty going, to keep the rulership going. And this goes back to another time. So it goes back to these sage kings. Where was Confucius looking back to? He was looking back to the early Shah dynasty, where he had these sage kings, Zhao, Yu, and Shun. And these people were full of wisdom, and they were dealing, actually, it's post-deluge. This is the deluge from a BC point of view, supposedly took place at 2344 BC. And this is 70, 80 years later that the Shah dynasty starts to form. And they have all these problems with water. And these sage kings not only have wisdom to farm money and do all these other things, but they have a sense of ethics and morality. And they teach that. And for over 1,000 years, these sage kings are bleeding through the philosophies of China all the way up to today. And here's Lao Tzu, who also lived right during the time. He was like 10, 15 years older than Confucius. And he said, immeasurable indeed were the ancients, subtle and mysterious, fathomless and penetrating. And he's referring to these sage kings. So all these sage kings, they practiced, and in particular Shun, he introduced the sacrifice of an unblemished lamb. And they worshipped Shangdi. And Di, as you know, we have the term deity. Actually, in greater than 20 languages, the word Di is referred to as God. But Shangdi is Shang is to be on top of. That means to be like in heaven. Shangdi, Lord on high. Any of you can have Huang Tian Shangdi is the great, wondrous God Almighty. And this is interesting, because this is what Kongsu was looking back on. And so this is Taishan. In Taishan, this is where they sacrificed this. So on December 21st, the emperor would climb up this long mountain. It takes a long time. And you have these very strange looking features of this mountain. And they'd come up here on Taishan. And it's one of the 5 or 6 sacred mountains of China where this worship pattern took place. I find this really interesting, because we're going to bring out the harmony in Chinese, and we're going to bring out the Kongsu. That's what the point I'm getting to. If we're going to do that, you know, Rudyard Kipling has this famous saying. He said, "East is east, west is west, and never the twain shall meet." But actually right here they do meet. Because if you look at what leaps over at this post-flood, you have this individual, Shem. There's 3 sons of Noah. And Shem is actually the worshiper. Japheth is the businessman. And Ham is the inventor. This is the characteristics of these 3 sons. And Shem is a person who travels. And outside of the Bible, it's actually referenced twice in the Bible, in the Old Testament. It says, and it could be seen in the book of Jasher. Well, the book of Jasher was found. It was lost for well over 1,000 years. It was found like 200 years ago. And inside that, it gives the whole story of Shem. And Shem's a traveler. He goes about dealing with the worship section. He deals with worship itself. And Shem inhabits, and all his sons move east. Japheth moves to Turkey and into Europe, and Ham moves through the Arabia down into Africa. That's where that bloodline comes from. So Abraham, for example, when he was born, his father had particular soothsayers and shamans over his house today celebrating the birth of Abraham. And they looked in the sky, and this is out of the book of Jasher, and they saw that a king was born. And so they told Nimrod. Nimrod wanted Abraham killed. And Abraham was given to Shem for 50 years. And this is all in the book of Jasher. It's all interesting. But I find it kind of odd that Shem and Shun are very similar in enunciation. And on top of that, when you look into the Chinese language, for example, the word for boat, you have 8 mouths. 8 mouths. What was on Noah's boat? There were 8 mouths, okay? And when you have the word for restraint, you have 2 trees and you have a woman below that. Or, if you want to have a control, there's like hundreds of these examples. Excuse me, I just want to pull it up so I don't get this wrong. Shu, which is restraint. That's a mouth in the tree, or control. And temptation is 2 trees and a woman below, or to covet. That's that character. Or 2 trees and reveal below is prohibit, or to forbid. And so there's books now written, and this was just discovered in the past 20 to 25 years, that there seems to be some relationship between the books of Genesis and the Chinese language. That embedded in the characters is actually a sense of the Judeo-Christian way. And so my point in all of this, right here, this riddle of knowledge, is that this is, if we tie in to Confucius' way, and we act in the Confucian way, then we're going to bring out the Confucius in the Chinese counterpart. So the very first concept is Tian. And so there's the Shah dynasty, there's the Shang dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty. In the Shah and the Shang, God was basically said to be Shangdi. But then eventually he turns into the word Tian. And so when Confucius uses this word Tian, he's often referring to God Almighty. So he was very much a single God worshiper. And then there's this word Ren. And in this character you could say a person next to two people dealing with each other. And this is probably the lead one single character that is the most powerful character in Confucian thought. If you can do the Ren towards someone else, you can bring out the best in them. And then the next is Yi, righteousness. On this one, for example, we have a lamb above the word I. And this means righteousness. You can see the connections to Judeo-Christian thinking there. And here, Tao, you've heard this before, like the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu. And here the Tao, is 2 feather caps for a general, total control of the mind. And another one, intelligence, Jur, Jur. Jur is, that's said in the Bible, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, for lack of intelligence. And Confucius definitely pushed that we should know as much as we can know to what we can know. And then Junzi, which is also the same concept that we have at VMI. and the same concept we have at WNL. Junzi is to become the gentleman or the lady. And lastly here, this is a very important concept because this Li right here is the same concept as that sacrifice on Taishan. So my point is there's more characters that I could go over relative to Kongzi and Confucius. But in acting, these are just examples and lead examples of Confucian thinking. If you can be this way, then you're going to bring this out.